Alright, welcome back. Today we're going to reassemble the crankcase. Yay! Alright, so I've done some prep work ahead of time. I've cleaned the gasket mating surfaces on both sides. And I've acquired the correct gasket sealant. This is AB1207B sealant, which is exactly what Suzuki Bond is, and Honda Bond, and 3 Bond, and all those other bonds. Okay, so we're going to do this. We're going to cut the tip off of this tube, and we're going to apply a smooth painted on layer of sealant. Just paint it right on there, nice and smooth. You don't want it too thick or too thin. I was expecting this stuff to be white or gray, but it turned out it's black. The Eisen sealant was made, I believe, for the remanufacturing of transmissions, but it's the same thing. Same sealant. So we just want to paint it over the entire surface with our fingers. Get it nice and smooth. I've searched high and low through the owner's manual, and I have found that there is nothing to direct me on how to do this. I am flying by the seat of my pants. I don't know how well this is all going to work out. I do not have torque specs. I do not have torque intervals. I got nothing. I have absolutely nothing to guide me along, which really sucks, because this is a critical part of the reassembly and rebuilding process that is clearly not covered in the owner's or service manual that I have. So I don't know what to do. This is what I have. And I've looked online for any kind of guidance, but we're going to let this set up, by the way, for a couple of minutes. I have no guidance. I have nothing. I have nothing. So we're going to let this skin over for like, it says assemble within 15 minutes. I'm going to give it like, I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes. In 5 minutes I'm going to pop it back together. And I do not have the correct crank tool to press the crank in place or to press the bearing onto the crank. I just didn't feel like buying it because it's a lot of money when I use it once. So I've decided not to buy that tool. Hopefully it doesn't cost me in the end. I'm going to do what I have to do and make it work. So let's stop the camera. Okay, after 5 minutes, I'm going to start preheating the bearing. This is a little bit controversial as to whether or not this is going to be effective. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the bearing inner race so that it'll easily slide over the crank. I'm not going to get it too hot, just enough to expand it a little bit, because obviously it's a press fit. And that's why I didn't put the oil seal in yet. The oil seal is going to go in after the cover's on and in place. So I'm just going to heat up the inner race a little bit. Okay, upside down. Okay, love taps, baby. Done. Done. Oh wait, not quite done. Crank still works. Bearing works. That didn't put up a fight at all, and that's what you want. You don't want it. You don't want to have to tap that crank hard because you can damage it, and that's important, and very important, in fact, because you can easily damage and destroy a perfectly good crank by putting too much on it. You know. The manual doesn't call for thread locker on these bolts, so I'm not going to put any. And again, the manual doesn't call for much in the way of engine reassembly either. So, now these should all go in nice and smooth because I have cleaned all of these bolts up with a wire wheel. That was one of my projects today. So I'm just going to go with a generic crisscross pattern since I don't have a proper guide. Oh yeah, that gap is nice and closed now. I don't have a proper guide for this, so I'm going to go with a generic kind of crisscross pattern. And now my crank is tight. Alright, so let's give it another tap or two. There we go. I had to finally, when it was torqued down, it had to move just a bit, just a little bit. Now it's moving nice and freely. Okay. I'm going to pre-torque these bolts a little bit at a time. Easy does it. Torque is critical. Wish I had torque specs, but I don't. Back to this one, over to this one. I'm going to switch modes. I'm going to take my T-handle and I'm going to put it to a different position. So that way I can really get on these. If I have no way of getting proper torque on this with a torque wrench, I'm just going to do it by feel. That's how they used to do it. That's how they did it on the farms, working on the tractors. They didn't have special fancy tools. They didn't have torque wrenches. Are you kidding me? Get it nice and tight. Do it the best we can. This is why the Japanese use JIS. I wish they would have used something a little more standard like 10mm bolts. What are you going to do? Alright. At this point, it's appropriate for us to possibly pop in that oil seal. So let me go grab that. Alright, I found it. I have the right seal. Here it is. Okay. Let me give it a few love taps. This should do it. It's a little better. Okay, you want it just almost flush so that it doesn't hit that bearing. That should, that's probably a little too far in. Let's see. It'll ride up with wear. No, it's in there. It's good. Alright. Alright, well, now that we're this far in, why don't we go ahead and put the stator back in place. I'm still waiting for another shipment of parts. I have a new flywheel key on order, and I'm going to need that. So, alright, here's my stator. The thing is, disassembling an engine without the proper tools and techniques is really not good. And you're supposed to use a special tool to extract the flywheel from the crankshaft. I'm sorry, I have that tool. To extract the bearing, there's a tool that you use to press this all out. And I didn't have that tool, so I did something that you're not supposed to do. Let's just leave it at that. Alright, so now we're going to line this up perfectly. There's my punch mark there. There's a punch mark here. Okay, that'll do. That should get it going. We'll tighten these up. Okay. You don't need it too tight. It's not going to rattle loose or anything, but just make it nice and snug. Remember, the engine casting is still very soft aluminum alloy, so you don't want to give it too much. You don't want to make it cry for mercy. So now we're ready to put the stator cover on, but that all has to be painted first before we really go too far with that. I'm going to throw the flywheel on and see if I can get it to see if it lines up still. Yeah, lines up nice. Engine spins freely. Okay, nothing grinds, good. Because that new crankshaft seal is so tight, it's going to take a little bit to work itself in. So, all right. So when putting this on, we don't want to use, and I don't use RTV on paper gaskets anymore. I used to, and I stopped doing it because it just makes a mess. And when you take engines apart like this, you don't find RTV squeezed everywhere because it just isn't necessary. However, paper gasket, put oil on it. That's what I was taught from a young age. And also, make sure you buy the right gaskets. Oh wait, there we go, it fits. For a second I thought I had the wrong one. Whoops. Okay. So these reeds are not bent, they're not broken. That's about the extent of the inspection that we need to do here. But however, I am going to, and I should do this, make sure that there's make sure these are nice and tight. If one of these screws falls out, bye-bye engine. I'm going to just tweak them a little bit. There we go. This one too. There we go. Okay. Shouldn't put any pressure on these. You can bend them. I think I just did just that. So I'm going to straighten it back out. These little fingers are meant to stop the reeds when they hit a certain point. So I'm just going to straighten that back out to where it was. Okay. Nice. Wipe the aluminum off my laptop. There we go. Okay. And just plop that in there. And we got so there's a ground strap on this side. I remember that being there. I'm going to put that back where it belongs. This is the main engine ground here. As thin and wimpy as it is. And on this side we had a metal strap to get the stator wiring out of the way with the wheel. I'm going to use my number 2 JIS for that. Okay, there should be 2 more. Here's the other one. I just had it here. There it is. Unfortunately, I'm not ready to put the carburetor back on because I do not have the parts to do so. They did not arrive as they were supposed to arrive, and they're on back. I got 2 parts on back order. I believe that actually went something like that. So I'm going to finish the job with a ratchet. Alright, we're starting to kind of wind things down a little bit. A lot of the major work is now done, so I'm working on some detail work while I wait for more parts and while the weather clears up so I can do the final paint work on this cover here. So this is the battery box. I don't know if you saw this in the earlier video. I stripped all the paint off of it. Actually, the paint pretty much just fell off of it. This had been badly corroded. You can still see there's a lot of pitting in this metal. I could have corrected that by using a high build primer and then sanding it down, but I decided against it because no one's ever going to see this part. I really just wanted to paint it to protect it from more rust. So this actually was cleaned off. All the paint was taken off and it was soaked in evapor rust for about a night or so. About 12 hours. And that took all the corrosion off, and then I applied some chassis paint. This is epoxy paint designed for chassis components, and it's not a true epoxy paint because there's no button on the bottom, so I'm not sure how they can even call it that, but whatever. Here's the toolkit box. This actually mounts to right under the seat, and this is where you would put your registration and your little Suzuki toolkit. Which I got to get one of those. So, again, I didn't really go crazy with, sanding, and I didn't prime it. I didn't do any of that. I just wanted it to look good. These are parts that, again, nobody's ever really going to see these except, if they lift the seat up or if they take the battery out. Again, next week, this is all going to get painted. I'll be able to mount at least the transmission cover. But to protect the finish on this, I want to make sure this is like the last thing I put on. Same with the stator cover. And I got to remount this to the battery box. This is our rectifier. There's an easy way to test this with a multimeter. Current should only flow through it one way, and that's pretty easy to test. So let's go ahead and look at our engine. It's back in the closet here. So the engine, the top, this is all reassembled here. I had to come back and add this bracket. I forgot this actually goes here, and so I took this back off. And this has a brand new cable adjuster for the oil pump cable. That came with my new throttle cable set, which I bought from Suzuki for 15 bucks, I think. Really short money. Top end will be the last thing I do because I have to order one. It's $140 plus shipping. That's going to include a new piston, a new cylinder, rings, and a wrist pin, I believe. I'm actually going to buy a new small end bearing. I got to do that. But this is all reassembled. This all seems to work smoothly. We got new axle bearings, axle seal, countershaft bearings, a new outer crank bearing, the right side bearing, and seal. And I'm really hoping that I don't have a problem with this middle seal. To do the middle seal, I have to pull the crank out, and at that point I'm going to replace the crank bearing. But I don't think that is an issue. It wasn't a problem when I had the engine running before. It was not an issue, but it could become one, so I got to keep an eye on that. I know conventional wisdom is to just go ahead and take the crank out at this stage. In fact, it wouldn't take much to do that. Just unbolt this. I'd have to heat this up and get this nut off, and I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it unless I have to. Now that I know how the engine goes together, I could probably have that job done in 5 minutes if it turned out to be a problem. Well, not really 5 minutes, but Now, to tell if the inner crank seal is bad, there's an easy test to do that. What you'd want to do is put a vacuum gauge on this port, or just put your hand here, or put something here, and with the engine running, if you detect a vacuum at this oil fill port, then this middle seal is likely bad. Or if you find that your oil in the transmission is going down unexplainably, then that is the problem. But because this side of the engine really had all the damage, and this side didn't seem to show any signs of overheating or anything, I just left it alone. So let's take a look at the chassis. So here's the bike chassis itself, and I've done some work off camera to start putting this back together again. So now that I got my new throttle cable, I was able to install the new center cover. This is a brand new center cover. The original one was badly UV damaged, and I'm finding a trend here. All the plastics were UV damaged, substantially UV damaged. And so I went ahead and I replaced pretty much everything you see that's plastic, except for the oil tank cover, which they no longer sell. But I could probably get one from Cyprus, which is an island near Greece that actually seems to have a lot of parts for these things. But anyway, got a new center tube cover, new head tube cover with the Suzuki logo, some new old stock decal and cover. And that cost me more money than almost any part on this bike. This is the most expensive part. This cost me around $60 to replace. The original one of the mounting tabs was snapped off, and it needed to be repainted. And it was just cheaper and easier to just get one that was pre-painted. The rest of the paint on the frame is actually in pretty good shape, except for the fuel tank. I'm going to do something with that. Don't really know what yet, but I'm still figuring that part out. This thing did have, I won't say it had a hard life, but it was used. It was definitely used. It doesn't look like it was abused, but it was definitely used. This is not one that sat, outside in the rain for its, 37-year life. This was more than likely a lot of the surface rust and the chrome. This can happen if you store a bike like this in a shed or an unheated area. What happens is, in fact, I was just at my dad's house, and he has his motorcycle, his quad, his snowblower, all these tools, all in the garage, which is not heated in the winter. And you walk in there on a day that suddenly swings up and warms up, and because we just had a day where it went from about -10 to 60. I mean, that's New Hampshire. That's just how it is here. What happened was everything in its garage had water on it, just from condensation. And that is what causes a lot of the corrosion on these chrome parts. So my plan at this stage is to explore the possibility of powder coating at least the front and rear racks. Chrome is too expensive. It will cost me hundreds of dollars to re-chrome these parts. So I'm thinking possibly exploring powder coating, and there's a chrome simulated powder coating that they can use. It's not as expensive as chrome, but we'll see what happens. I don't know how far I'm going to go with this thing. I'm going to definitely get it running and driving within the next month or two, and from there I don't know. We'll see where it goes. But I'm not spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars in chrome work for this. It just isn't worth it. So I got to see what options I have. And then again, I have to disassemble this all back apart, and I'm going to repaint this headlamp shroud and speedometer assembly. I'm going to use, I got to look at what options I have for paint colors. I'm going to buy a couple of cans of Krylon and Rust-Oleum, figure out which shade of red matches this closely. It'd be nice to actually find a color chart for these paint manufacturers, because if I can find something close, then I'll be fine. Because, I mean, as it is, the forks no longer match the head tube cover, because the forks are slightly faded. In fact, I need to close these blinds. That's how it's getting faded, damn it. The sun. Frickin' sun. Alright. Moving on. Next time we'll probably cover the final assembly of the engine. That's putting the outer covers back on and hopefully installing the engine back into the frame. Can't wait to do it. Until then. Okay, so we've got the engine covers painted. This is our transmission swing arm cover, and here's our stator cover. Now take a look at this finish. Tell me what you think. It's not perfect, but it has a nice shine to it. It's nice and thick, but most importantly, hard as a rock. Also did the same thing to the transmission cover. Now there were some surface imperfections like this scratch, which I didn't bother to hide. I could have filled this in, but I think the end result is pretty good. It has a nice shine to it, really catches the light, and this is the side that you're going to see the most. There are a few imperfections. It turns out I didn't do a perfect job in stripping it. There were some little flakes of paint here and there that I missed. I should have went over it with a wire brush, but I didn't even think of it until after I did it. But I think it looks all right. And you know what? If it bothers me, I can always redo it. It's not hard. So the products that I used to paint these engine casings, I used Rust-Oleum self-etching primer. Now this is designed to provide a decent bonding surface to bare aluminum and of course any other metal. But it's really, I bought this, actually I bought this to repaint those fan blades because they're aluminum. And when you paint on aluminum, you really want to use a self-etching primer. I ended up not using it, so that's what I used on these covers, and it worked pretty well. You really shouldn't paint directly onto aluminum because it will. The reason that you can't paint aluminum surfaces has to do with the surface layer of oxidization that forms immediately after the aluminum is stripped away, for whatever coatings are stripped away off of it. There's an oxidization layer that forms on aluminum that you can't really see. And the self-etching primer is designed to eat through that and go directly to the aluminum. Kind of like how when you solder, you always want to use a flux. Same principle. But anyway, the self-etching primer gives you a nice base layer to apply your top coat. This is what I used, VHT wheel paint. This is a silver paint. And then I top that with a couple of coats of VHT gloss clear. Wheel paint differs a little bit from standard spray paint in that it's a very hard paint. It dries very quickly, and it is a very hard paint. So it can withstand a lot more abuse. So things like engine casings and wheels, it really does a nice job. In fact, I'm going to use the same trifecta of coatings to do the license plate bracket and the tail light bracket. So it'll look uniform, it'll match this. So this is ready to bolt on. It's got the new seal already, of course, for the kickstart shaft, and I've got the new counter shaft bearing already mounted in there. So I'm going to put this on. Once I get the rest of the engine assembled, I'll put the outer covers on, and that'll be a quick and easy job. Alright? Alright. So one more thing that I always do on parts like this where durability is key. What I'll do is I'll bake these parts in the, I've already done this, I bake these in the oven at around 200 to 225 Fahrenheit for about half an hour. And what that does is it accelerates the curing process of the paint. It causes all the solvents to just kind of evaporate out much quicker. And what I've found is it allows the paint to cure much harder. It almost works like powder coating in a way. It kind of relaxes all the coatings and melds them together, and it really does a great job of that. And I've done that for dozens of projects over the years, and I found that the end result is a much better looking finish, a harder finish, and a longer lasting finish. Again, 200 degrees. You don't want to go much hotter than that. You don't want to bring the paint to its max. If you notice, this is 250 degree paint. That is hardly really high temperature, but you know, 250 degrees is not a lot. And in fact, if you exceed that, it will bubble. If you didn't prep the surface correctly, it will bubble and it will start to peel when you put it in the oven. But if you do it right, this is what you get. And we got to finish that. I never sanded between layers like you're supposed to. I just sprayed it on, waited 10 minutes, did my second coat, wait 10 minutes, do the clear, 10 more minutes, do another clear, bake it in the oven after it cures for like half an hour or so. And this is what you end up with. And I'm pretty confident that that's going to hold up nicely.